Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Timo and today is all gonna be about this guy because I'm gonna show you my gaming PC. Let's get started. Okay, so before we start, this is my very first gaming PC that I've ever built myself, so I might have made a few mistakes along the way, so please be nice to me. Anyway, as you might have already guessed, I'm a fan of minimalist and clean setups, which is why I wanted to go with exactly that approach and just get a black and white setup as opposed to these over-the-top gaming setups with tons of RGB lighting and RGB strips and stuff like that. I just don't think that it looks too good, but that aside, I do have an RGB strip as well as RGB memory inside of it, so I could technically still go for that, but for now I'm fine with no lighting and this kind of setup. Okay, so about the PC itself, it is based around the Ryzen 5 3600 processor from AMD. It's certainly not the most powerful CPU in the market, but in terms of value, it is very hard to beat that CPU because it has not only 6 cores but also 12 threads, and that comes with a very low price point compared to the Intel rivals. And because with the Ryzen 3000 series, AMD really stepped up their game as far as single core performance goes, the CPUs have become a better and better performer in games as well. As for the RAM, I went with two 8GB sticks of Corsair Vengeance Pro RGB memory clocked at 3200 MHz. Initially I wanted to go for 32GB, but at the time of planning this PC, RAM prices weren't exactly the greatest, so I just figured going with 16GB for now is also fairly enough. And I didn't want to go for just one single 16GB stick because Ryzen processors benefit a lot from having two memory sticks and using dual channel memory because of that, which gives them a little bit of a performance boost. So I didn't really want to sacrifice that and went with just 16GB for now, but maybe I'm gonna update that at some point. The CPU and the RAM are mounted on the ASRock Vitality B450 motherboard. I'm gonna confess I didn't know too much about motherboards when planning this PC, so that was just kind of an afterthought. I just knew I had to get a B450 motherboard of some sort with an AM4 socket that fits inside this form factor. And I had the choice between like 2 or 3 others, but I went with this one simply because it does have an additional USB-C port on the back. Although I'm not going to keep the motherboard forever, it is still nice to have that little bit of future-proofing if you want. When I planned this PC, the X570 motherboards were already out, but because I wanted to go for a sort of upper mid-range system, I couldn't really go for these motherboards because they were just too expensive to fit my budget, and I just thought that getting an older motherboard and just doing a BIOS update is enough for now, and so I just went with that instead. As for storage, I went with a 1TB Samsung 860Q VO SSD, simply because I believe that PCs in 2020 shouldn't really rely on mechanical hard drives anymore, because SSD prices have come down in the recent years a lot, to the point where you can get like 120 gigs for $20 or something, and a terabyte for around 100. I think that mechanical hard drives in terms of PCs aren't an option anymore. You can use them for like servers and stuff like that, but if you want to use it for a PC, just don't get an SSD instead. It will save you a whole lot of time and it will feel so much snappier, and you're gonna end up liking the system more than you would with a mechanical hard drive. Okay, so the GPU choice was a little bit difficult because I wanted to be somewhat of an early adapter to NVIDIA's ray tracing technology, but again, my budget wasn't too high, so I couldn't really go for like a 2080 Ti or something. I just wanted to go for an upper mid-range build, so I figured that the only two options were either the 2060 or the 2070, but the 2060 was just too slow, if you will, because it was just held back by its only 6GB of VRAM, whereas the 2070 on the other hand was just a little bit too expensive to fit my budget, so I kind of was a little bit between a rock and a hard place. But then luckily NVIDIA came out with the RTX 2060 Super, which I've got right here, which fixed the only complaint that I and a lot of other people in the PC community had with the 2060, which was the lack of enough VRAM to fully take advantage of the power of the 2060. And when they gave the 2060 2 additional gigs of VRAM while keeping the price closer to the price of the 2060, as opposed to the 2070, it was a no-brainer to me to go for this exact card. And I've actually got the Founders Edition right here because I think that those cards are the most beautiful GPUs on the market that have ever existed actually. And I think that simply in terms of design, Nvidia went a step back with the 3000 series Founders Edition cards. They just don't look nearly as good as the 20 series cards do. My power supply of choice was the 550 watt Be Quiet Straight Power 11 because of two reasons. One, it is fully modular, meaning you don't have any useless cables floating in your case. And two, because it's got sleeved cables, which I think is a huge deal, because obviously I wanted my PC to actually look good as well, which would have been impossible with these ketchup and mustard cables. And so I think that this was a great solution, because I didn't really want to spend extra money on getting sleeved cables just for the look of it, when these cables do come with a black sleeve around them. And I highly recommend you do that as well if you don't want to spend extra money on sleeved cables. And all of these components fit inside the NZXT H210, which is, in my opinion, also one of the most beautiful cases on the market. Okay, but now that you know what's inside the PC, let's see how it compares in not only games, but also a few benchmarks. Okay, so the first benchmark is going to be 3DMark TimeSpy, which tests mainly the CPU performance. And here we can see that we've got a somewhat decent score as expected, because the processor is not the most powerful on the market, but it does get a fairly decent score, being better than 62% of all results that have ever been tested with this benchmark. And yes, it is below their recommendation for a gaming PC for 2020, but this gaming PC that they recommend is based on a Ryzen 7 3700X, which is an 8-core processor as opposed to my 6-core processor, so that's all fine. That just shows that a Ryzen 7 is more powerful than a Ryzen 5. In 3DMark Firestrike, however, we do get a very different result. This benchmark focuses more on the GPU performance as well as a combined performance from GPU and CPU, and we get a score of just above 16,000 points, which again is under their recommendation for a gaming PC in 2020. And I actually ran this benchmark earlier this year when I built this PC, and there I got a score of just under 19,000 points, which was still well above their recommendation for a 4K gaming PC, which scored just under 18,000 points. So yeah, now the score looks a little bit different because of new GPUs and CPUs being released, but that shows that it's still a very capable system. And now it's time to test out some games. And the first game that I've tried out is GTA 5, which despite its age is still a very popular game. And here we can see that in not too demanding situations we get well above 150 FPS. But as soon as we're in the city and there's a lot of explosions and shooting, we see the FPS drop to about 100, sometimes a little bit below that in the high 90s. But again, still very much playable. And next up we've got Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is a game that supports ray tracing, and I ran this benchmark at 2560 by 1080 at the Ultra preset. And here we can see that ray tracing stresses out the GPU quite a lot, because we get an average FPS of 48 with a minimum of 35 and a maximum of 99. But yeah, this game is graphically still very intense, but the 2060 Super gets through it fairly well. And lastly we've got Call of Duty Warzone, again a very popular title at the moment. And you can see that we're playing at a 2560 by 1080 resolution on basically the max preset. And you can see that we're basically reaching 75 FPS consistently, because that's the maximum that my monitor can display. So yeah, in theory the PC could be better, but it's just bottlenecked by my monitor. And here we can see that even when there's a lot of people around and a lot is going on, it still never really drops below that 75 FPS. Okay, so there you have it. This is my gaming PC, and I gotta say, for the first time building a PC, I think it turned out pretty decent. I know it's not the greatest, I know it's not the best performer, but I still love it and it gets me through everything that I wanted to do. And I wouldn't really recommend getting the exact same build, because I built this PC around January of this year, of 2020. And in the meantime, the RTX 3000 series came out. Like, you can get the RTX 3070, I believe, for around $500, while I got my 2060 Super for around $420, $430, I don't really know anymore. Yeah, and the performance is not comparable at all. The 3070 is gonna blow this card out of the water, but still, it is everything that I need, everything that I could want right now. I mean, I can stress it to its limits if I really, really want to, but you know, it's really fine. But if you do want to get into PC building, I highly suggest that you do your research on what parts you need for your build to do what you want to do with a PC, and then just get started with it. I've wanted to build a PC for the better part of the last 4 years now, and I never really did because I was a little bit afraid to fry my components, to throw the money out of the window essentially if that happens. But if you're somewhat careful, this is not going to happen at all. So yeah, that's it for my PC. I really hope you liked the video. If you did, please let me know either through a like or a comment. And please also let me know if you didn't like the video or if you didn't like just certain parts of it, because I'm still learning, I'm still here to improve. But other than that, I hope you're having a great day, and maybe I'm gonna see you in the next one. Peace.